This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Now, live and direct from the press box at Old Comiskey Park, it's time for When Football Was Football. Let's join your host, Joe Ziemba, with another forgotten tale from Chicago's pro football history. Let's go!
Thank you, and welcome to When Football Was Football. I'm your host, Joe Ziemba. Back at the beginning of the National Football League in 1920, one of the smallest men in the circuit drew the biggest paycheck. And this was likely due to the fact that he certainly earned it. This little dynamo played 3 professional sports, survived a collegiate scandal, and was a head coach at both the collegiate and NFL levels. So welcome again to this episode of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. Today we'll travel back to the early days of the 20th century to meet John L. Paddy Driscoll, a well-deserving member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame and one of the most exceptional athletes to ever emerge from the Chicago area and the National Football League. While we have talked about Mr. Driscoll before in this program, it's always an honor to share more information about his extraordinary exploits. After all, he was the stuff legends are made of, including one example when he successfully converted a 50-yard dropkick while semi-conscious. He was a shifty runner, an outstanding kicker, an accurate passer for the era, and a defender who was never afraid to splatter a much bigger running back in the open field. And all of this was accomplished by a gentleman who stood just 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighed in at around 150 pounds. I've borrowed some information on Mr. Driscoll from my book When Football Was Football and sprinkled in some additional facts and fables to prepare for this latest profile. But our focus today will be on perhaps the most exceptional month, or should we say year, of Driscoll's football career. While he gave us many highlights, we dusted off some old microfilm recently to find that over a 4-game period for the Chicago Cardinals in 1923, Driscoll scored every single one of his team's points. Even better, in the 9 NFL games that Paddy Driscoll played in 1923, he scored all of his team's points in 5 of those games. While we don't believe that the NFL tracks such a record, the only performance close to that mark might be when the great Ernie Nevers, also of the Cardinals, tallied all 59 of his team's points over a 2-game stretch in 1929. Of course, the one similarity between Driscoll and Nevers was the fact that both also served as their team's place kicker. So in addition to rushing or receiving touchdowns, each of these gifted individuals could also pick up more points via field goals and extra points. However, Driscoll favored the drop kick, while Nevers preferred the straight-ahead place kick. And both players did extremely well in handling these chores during their NFL careers. Driscoll, who was born in 1895 in Evanston, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, first enjoyed athletic success at Evanston High School, where he participated in football, baseball, and basketball. He was good enough to be noticed by nearby Northwestern University, where he quickly became a standout in both football and baseball. On the gridiron, Driscoll was an evasive halfback and an exceptional kicker. Behind Driscoll's leadership in 1916, his junior year, Northwestern's football team defeated the University of Chicago for the first time in 15 years and rose to second place in the Big Ten Conference behind Ohio State with a 6-1 record. He was named to a pair of All-American teams, and the founding father of football, Walter Camp, called Driscoll the greatest quarterback I have ever seen. But then Driscoll made a fateful decision that temporarily stalled his burgeoning athletic career. Following the 1917 Northwestern baseball season, Driscoll was working out with the nearby Chicago Cubs. At that time, according to the Los Angeles Times, which said, "There's a rule that permits a major league club to try out a semi-pro or amateur in 10 games without signing." Well, the newspaper added that at least 5 major league clubs were seeking the services of Driscoll, who eventually signed with the Chicago Cubs. In his first major league at bat, Driscoll drilled a double in a 10-6 loss to the New York Giants. But his baseball stats quickly went downhill from there. Driscoll managed an ugly 107 batting average in several games in 1917 before being shipped down to the minors. However, his signing enraged the amateur and collegiate athletic ranks, since the professionals were now clearly soliciting the services of leading college players. The South Bend Tribune stated, "Driscoll's signing by the Chicago Cubs may stir up a scrap between college and professional sports that will last some while." Obviously, Driscoll's contract with the Cubs ended his Northwestern amateur career, as noted by the Chicago Tribune in September of 1917, when the Tribune was covering the Northwestern football prospects. It said, "Paddy is ineligible because of playing professional baseball with the Cubs." So while his senior year in sports at Northwestern was eliminated due to ineligibility, Driscoll began working out with the Northwestern football varsity in the fall of 1917 and assisting with some coaching duties. He also faced the strong possibility of being swept into the military as the need for military personnel for World War I began to intensify. The Fargo, North Dakota Forum indicated that second baseman Paddy Driscoll has the honor of being the first Chicago Cub to join the Army. He is not required to report until September 5th. Although Driscoll did not receive the call at the time, he would eventually find an ideal assignment for his military future in early 1918, but more on that in a little bit. Although fully intending to continue with the Cubs in 1918, Driscoll's woeful major league batting average would not guarantee a position with the parent club. So for the 1917 gridiron season, Driscoll joined the professional Hammond, Indiana football team for $50 per game, where he delighted the local fans, especially in one game against the Cornell Hamburgs of Chicago. Hammond won that game 13-3 with Driscoll booting 2 long field goals, including one that astonished even his teammates. After returning a punt in the first half, the Chicago Evening Post claimed that Driscoll was staggered by the defensive tacklers, saying, "When tackled and running back a punt, Paddy Driscoll was knocked out on his feet. Without being aware of the fact, he drop-kicked the field goal from the 53-yard line after calling signals for a forward pass. He had to be taken out of the game." Since this was not a punting or a field goal situation, Driscoll was asked at halftime why he decided to go with the drop kick instead of the expected passing play. "Well, what drop kick?" he replied. "And what's the score anyway?" Well, then in early 1918, Driscoll finally did enter the military and received a very attractive assignment for his wartime duties. That was the Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Glenview, Illinois, just north of Chicago. The station strongly believed in providing solid publicity for the base and the military in general, and sponsored strong teams in several sports, including baseball, basketball, and football. Driscoll eagerly participated in the sports opportunities, including the football team in the fall of 1918. Driscoll's teammates included future NFL legends George Halas and Jimmy Councilman, among others, as the team captured the 1919 Rose Bowl. Because of the ongoing war, as well as an influenza epidemic, not all colleges would field the team during the 1918 football season. Although Driscoll led Great Lakes to a solid 6-0-2 record, despite playing a major college schedule against teams such as Illinois and Notre Dame. Perhaps his most brilliant performance was against Rutgers. In this game, Rutgers grabbed a surprising 14-0 lead over the favored visitors, before Driscoll went ballistic on the gridiron by racking up 6 touchdowns and 5 extra points to total 41 points in an eventual 54-14 rout of Rutgers. Well, apparently Driscoll was fun to watch that day, as the Chicago Tribune explained. His long-distance runs through broken fields, combined with snake-like twists and dodges, repeatedly thrilled the spectators. The spectacular play of Driscoll continued in the Rose Bowl on January 1st, 1919. Because of the still existing threat from the influenza epidemic, the game was played with two military teams, Great Lakes and Mare Island from California. It remains the only time that two collegiate teams did not play in the Rose Bowl. As it was, Great Lakes emerged with a crisp 17-0 win thanks to the sparkling talent of quarterback Driscoll, who drop-kicked a 35-yard field goal and also connected with George Hallis for a 32-yard TD toss. Of course, the visual appearance of the slight quarterback impressed the local media, including the Los Angeles Times, which happily stated, "Everyone wanted to see Driscoll and could easily distinguish the little knock-kneed Irishman by his diminutive size." After Driscoll's performance that afternoon, Hallis said, "Few backfield men ever turned in a more perfect game than Driscoll did against Mare Island." Although Driscoll played baseball for the minor league Los Angeles Angels in 1919, his football reputation continued to grow when he rejoined the Hammond, Indiana Pros that season. Driscoll was part of an impressive roster that once again included George Hallis and which tackled the leading professional clubs of the time, such as the Canton Bulldogs and the immortal Jim Thorpe. This team, Hammond that is, was truly unique since it was also known as the All-Stars because of its so many well-known gritters. Hammond finished the schedule in 1919 with a so-so 4-2-3 record, but it received more publicity when the players arranged to have manager Paul Perdun arrested for issuing bad checks to the players near the end of the season. Let's fast forward a year to September 8, 1920, when Chris O'Brien, the manager of the Racing Cardinals in Chicago, shocked the football world by signing Paddy Driscoll to a contract that would earn Driscoll an amazing $300 per game, with a guarantee of 10 games. In the days when a loaf of bread cost 11 cents and an NFL franchise reportedly $100, this was truly a substantial salary. So in 1920, Driscoll was the man that O'Brien decided to build his team around in the new professional league that would soon be known as the NFL. It was a wise choice despite the outrageous salary for the time. Driscoll would also serve as player coach, a scheme that was not uncommon in those days, but one that the Cardinals would continue to embrace during O'Brien's tenure, perhaps as a fiscal necessity. Driscoll posted winning records in each of his 3 seasons as the Cardinals coach, going 6-2-2 in 1920, 6-3-2 in 21, and 8-3 in 1922. But let's take a peek at that magical period during the 1923 campaign, during which Driscoll displayed his often unstoppable offensive tendencies. In the season opener on September 30th, Driscoll's 47-yard drop-kick field goal had provided the only points in the 3-0 win over the Buffalo All-Stars. The Cardinals were thus 1-0 when they hosted the Rochester Jeffersons on October 7th, 1923, at Normal Park on the south side of Chicago. Without keen communications and scouting reports, the Cards were wary but confident when entertaining the Jeffersons. So Driscoll played an awesome game, but it was hardly the only offensive contributor as the Cardinals mangled the visitor 60-0. Driscoll did not tally all of the team's points in this one, but he established a career high with 27 points. Paddy's efforts were illuminated by the Chicago Tribune, which reported, "Led by Paddy Driscoll, who crossed the Easterners' goal 4 times, the fleet Cardinal backs bewildered the visitors by their elusiveness, which helped them to long runs through the line and around the ends." In addition to his work on the ground, Driscoll picked up 3 extra points to finalize his total of 27, which is still the 3rd most ever scored by a Cardinals player in one game in team history. And who are the top 2, you may ask? Both were also from the Chicago Cardinals, with Ernie Nevers scoring all the points in a 40-6 victory over the Bears in 1929, followed by receiver Bob Shaw, who grabbed 5 touchdown passes for 30 points in 1950. During the next 3 weeks, Driscoll then proceeded to score every one of the Cardinals' points in wins over Akron 19-0, Minneapolis 9-0, and Dayton 13-3. The Akron Beacon told us all we needed to know after the Cardinals blitzed the Akron Pros 19-0 on October 14, 1923, when it said, "It can be credited to Paddy Driscoll, veteran star of the Cards, who upon numerous occasions made certain members of the Pros look like a bunch of bums." On this day, Driscoll scored once on an 8-yard run, added another with a pass reception, drop-kicked 2 field goals, and added an extra point for his 19 tallies. After his 80-yard dash in the fourth quarter, the Akron Beacon reported, "Paddy left the game after this sensational run, and Chicago fans gave him a great ovation, some going as far as to shout for a speech from the star." Next, the 1923 Cardinals improved to 4-0 with a tight 9-0 victory over the Minneapolis Marines in Chicago. Driscoll provided all 9 points with drop-kick field goals from 48, 45, and 23 yards out. On October 28th, the Dayton Triangles fell 13-3 with Driscoll administering all of the pain, according to the Dayton Daily News, which said, "In the second quarter, Driscoll booted a dropkick from the 25-yard line and then duplicated the feat from the same distance in the third quarter. In the fourth period, he crashed off tackle for a touchdown and added another point by kicking goal." By now, the football world was certainly aware of the extraordinary accomplishments of Mr. Driscoll. The Cardinals were flying high with a perfect 5-0 record, and Driscoll was not slowing down. Here is how the Daily Times of Davenport, Iowa assessed the situation. "What a sorry plight for the Chicago Cardinals would be if Paddy Driscoll did not wear a Cardinal uniform. In the first 5 league games, they scored 104 points, of which Driscoll contributed 71. The record showed that Driscoll scored every point in 4 of 5 games. The only chance his fellow backs had to show their worth was in the Rochester game. But this was a runaway, with the Cardinals winning 60-0. So would Driscoll's scoring dominance ever end? On November 4th, the Cardinals dropped their first decision of the season when visiting Canton escaped with a 7-3 win. The Dayton Daily News asserted that the weather was primarily responsible for this slow-scoring affair. Captain Paddy Driscoll was stopped by a combination of a heavy rain-soaked field and a sterling defense. Of course, Driscoll's field goal accounted for all of his team's points in the 4th straight game, but Paddy was injured in the battle and was unavailable the following week when the Cardinals edged Hammond 6-0. However, the last month of the season proved to be detrimental to both Driscoll and the Cardinals. Although Paddy's all-scoring streak ended with a 10-0 win over Duluth, he did score 4 points via a field goal and an extra point. The Cardinals moved to 7-1 for the year. The Southsiders then dropped 3 of their final 4 games to finish 8-4 and out of the running for the NFL title. Driscoll missed 2 of the last 4 contests due to injury and failed to add to his NFL leading point total of 81. Still, at the end of the year, it was enough to outdistance both Pete Henry of Canton, 58 points, and Dutch Sterneman of the Bears, who had 51, for the most points scored in the NFL during the 1923 campaign. Looking back now over 100 years, it might be argued that Driscoll was easily the best player in the early NFL and worth every penny of his impressive salary. He could run, kick, and defend. With his spectacular playing record at Northwestern from 1915 to 1916, Hammond 1917, Great Lakes 1918, and Hammond again in 1919, Driscoll had achieved a national notoriety that propelled him into the unique status of an early NFL box office attraction. His punting and drop kicking were things that created legends in his day. No one in the history of the NFL has ever exceeded his drop kicking records from his playing career, which concluded in 1929 with the Bears. Driscoll still holds the NFL records for most drop kick field goals in a game with 4, the longest drop kick in a game, 55 yards, and the most drop-kick field goals in a career with 49. During the opening game of the 1924 season against Milwaukee, Driscoll booted a 55-yard field goal that stood as the NFL record for the longest in league history until 1953. In a 19-9 win over Columbus in 1925, Driscoll drop-kicked 4 field goals, a team record. This mark was not equaled until Pat Summerall tied Driscoll's record in 1954, and it was not surpassed until 1964 by Jim Bachman. When the Cards stuffed Kansas City 20-7 in 1925, Driscoll broke away for an 80-yard touchdown run, which remained a team best until Elmer Ainsman scampered 82 yards for a score in 1949. Driscoll's feat is still the third best in team annals. However, his duplicate 80-yard TD run against Akron in 1923, which we mentioned, is for some reason not appearing in the Cardinals record book. Of course, we could share Paddy Driscoll stories all day, but as we await the start of the new NFL season, it's nice to remember a small but talented player whose superior scoring performance on the field during that brief stretch of the 1923 season remains an unknown mark that will likely never be surpassed. Thank you for joining us on this episode of When Football Was Football. Please check back soon for our next program, which will be a fun one as we share some of the wackiest moments in the history of the Cardinals, the NFL's oldest team. For example, did you know that the Cardinals were almost sold to a university at one time? Thank you. We will see you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.